The progress of history can be imagined as a pendulum, which swings back and forth over and over again. But what do I mean by that? Let's take the Renaissance as a starting example. After the Middle Ages was the Renaissance. And so during that swing of the pendulum, during the Renaissance, people rejected the Middle Ages and embraced and rediscovered the ancient Greeks and Romans. But then the pendulum swung again. After the Renaissance came the Enlightenment. And during the Enlightenment, those thinkers rejected the ancients and tried to create a new, scientific, skeptical, modern worldview. But the pendulum of history keeps on swinging. In Romanticism, which came next, Romanticism can be seen as a reaction to and even a rejection of Enlightenment ideals. They rejected the modern industrialized world and idealized and embraced the Middle Ages. To help us understand why people began to reject the ideas of the Enlightenment, we have to understand a little bit of the historical context, which was the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution started first in England in 1750, before rapidly spreading across Western Europe and America in the 1800s, before eventually taking root across the world. During the Industrial Revolution, factories were built. The once idyllic countryside was destroyed. The mines were being built, air and rivers were being polluted, and people left the countryside in enormous numbers and fled to the new, modern, dirty, overcrowded cities in search of those new factory jobs. Don't get me wrong, the Industrial Revolution was an era of tremendous progress. People who had been cursed to be peasants, toiling the land endlessly for centuries, were suddenly getting factory jobs and being lifted out of poverty in many circumstances. The countries that industrialized first, countries like England, Germany, or the United States, became immensely wealthy. Still, there were many people who saw this so-called march of progress as a terrible thing. They hated the ugliness, the pollutedness of this new modern industrial age, and longed to return to a simpler time, perhaps a more beautiful time. These people became known as the Romantics, and they started a movement known as Romanticism. Enlightenment thinkers saw nature as a machine. Descartes is an excellent example of this. This means that they believed that the entire world could be understood and manipulated with the power of human reason. For this reason, many of these Enlightenment thinkers also rejected traditional religion, which they viewed as supernatural. Instead, they embraced a belief called deism. Thomas Jefferson is an example of a deist. In deism, God was seen as a kind of great watchmaker who created the universe, created the laws of nature, set it in motion, but then stepped back and no longer interfered with human affairs. From this point of view, the universe was seen as a kind of intricately designed and perfect machine. But God is also seen as little more than a machinist. He's the one who designed the machine. He's not a supernatural entity who is personally involved and interested in your affairs. Romanticism's ideas are very different from these scientific, coldly mechanical Enlightenment ideas. The Romantics prized emotion and passion and intuition, perhaps even more than human reason. They valued the innocence and purity of children and saw these children as possessing some fundamental wisdom that adults had lost touch with. The Romantics didn't see Earth as a machine. They loved nature and claimed to prefer nature over the cities. In nature, you could see a clear reflection of the artistry of God. Nature was overwhelming, sublime, mysterious, even a little bit terrifying, but still extremely beautiful. Enlightenment thinkers believed that everything could be picked apart, understood, and manipulated by the power of human reason. But Romantic thinkers believed that not everything could, or even should, be understood.
I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Romantics also believed in the power of, yes, romantic love. They believed that marriages shouldn't be arranged or set up around economic concerns like how much money the other person had. Instead, marriages should be based in love and human connection. That was a really new idea at the time, and it comes out of Romanticism. Fittingly, while the Enlightenment is best understood through the writings of its philosophers, thinkers like John Locke or Montesquieu, Romanticism is probably best understood through its works of art and literature, because Romanticism prizes beauty and emotion over the coldness of reason and rationality. Perhaps the best romantic writer to understand Romanticism through is Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein and the daughter of one of the world's first feminist activists. While many in the modern industrial age believed that science would create a utopia, a perfect world, Mary Shelley's greatest work, Frankenstein, investigates what happens when science goes too far. What happens when humans play God? Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau believed that humans were perfectible. With the right education and the right institutions, humans could remake the world and make it a better place. And with the advent of new industrial technology, it seemed like humans could literally remake the world. But in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, humans set out to create life and instead create a monster, the monster of Frankenstein. This shows Romanticism's skepticism of so-called Enlightenment progress. Another artist whose work helps us understand the ideas of Romanticism was a German writer and scientist known as Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. He's usually just known as Goethe. He wrote perhaps the defining artistic work of the Romantic period in 1774, a book called The Sorrows of Young Werther. This was a fictionalized account of Goethe's own love affairs. In the book, a sensitive and passionate young man, Werther, falls in love with a woman named Charlotte, who's already engaged to another man. The book follows all the small steps of a young couple falling head over heels in love. Nevertheless, Charlotte marries the man that she was engaged to, and Werther cannot let go of his love for her. His love remains unrequited. Eventually, Werther commits suicide. He cannot live without his love for Charlotte. The Sorrows of Young Werther became extraordinarily popular. It became an emblem of this new romantic thought and the way it valued passion, emotion, and romantic love over the coldness of reason and rationality. Young people all over Europe started to dress the way that Werther was described to dress in the book. Some people even committed suicide the way that Werther did. Even Napoleon called it the greatest work ever written and would brag about how many times he had read it. It remains a powerful summary of Romanticism's idealization of passion and emotion over the Enlightenment ideals of reason and rationality. The Romantics advocated for a return to nature, away from the polluted, dirty, overcrowded modern cities. You can see this tendency even in a much later work, The Lord of the Rings. In The Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien idealizes the idyllic beauty of the Shire over the horrifically industrialized landscape of Mordor. In nature, the Romantics believed that you could get closer to God, and they saw this in the way that nature was, in their words, sublime. But what do we mean by sublime? Often, if we go out into nature and watch a sunset, we might call it beautiful. But beauty is kind of like a painting that I can frame and put on my wall and enjoy, and that I can call beautiful. But the sublime is different from that. When you go out into nature, into the wild, the beauty that is found there is overwhelming. It's awesome. It can even be terrifying or dangerous. That's what makes the beauty in nature sublime, because the sublime is beyond you. Romantics believed that by going into nature and getting in touch with the sublime, you could get in touch with the mysterious, overwhelming, and even mystical aspects of God, and you didn't need a priest to do it. This movement became especially popular actually right here in the United States, where painters such as Thomas Cole painted many landscapes of the wilderness of upstate New York. These wild places suddenly became not just beautiful, but a place to encounter the nature of God and the self. In all of its sublimity, great American writers such as Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau believed that going into nature could almost be like a new kind of religion, because by getting in touch with the sublime through nature, one could directly experience God without the need for priests, churches, or holy scriptures. The writings of the Romantics directly led to conservation movements and even the establishment of the world's first national parks. This can be seen especially through the writings of a naturalist named John Muir. John Muir was directly inspired by the writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And in his writings, you can see the powerful, overwhelming, even mystical way that nature reflects the sublime power of God. His writings directly led to the protection of Yosemite National Park, which is where John Muir lived. Today, he is considered one of the great heroes of California's history. Perhaps more than anything else, Romantics believed in the value of the inner life. Life shouldn't just be about going to your factory job and trying to survive and to make money. Life should be valued for its spiritual meaning, its emotional depth, for its beauty. For these reasons and more, the Romantics yearned for the past. While the people of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment saw the Middle Ages as a dark era of history, hence the term the Dark Ages, the Romantics yearned for a pre-industrial past. Ideas of knights in shining armor and damsels in distress became extremely popular. Notions of chivalry and honorable kings and queens remain extremely popular even until this day. That's why stories like King Arthur, Camelot, and the Knights of the Round Table still impact us in the 21st century. In other words, the Romantics romanticized the Middle Ages. Romanticism has had an enormous impact on the way we think about the world even today. People value romantic love and see that as more important than how much money the other person might have. Many people believe that nature needs to be protected. Many people believe that artists are special geniuses who are in touch with higher truths. All of these ideas come directly out of Romanticism, and their popularity even today shows us how impactful those ideas still remain. The pendulum of history never stops swinging. Even today, there are many people who believe that nature holds special hidden truths, and they value everything they see as more natural. You also see many other people who believe in approaching the world in a more skeptical, scientific, and modern way. You can see these as the tendency of Romanticism on the one hand and the Enlightenment on the other. But what do you resonate more with? The romantic or the rational? There are many people who look at our modern age as an era of technological wonder and spectacle. They look to the future with hope and believe that with the power of science, we'll be able to create a world that has rid itself from poverty and disease. Meanwhile, there are many others who yearn for a more romantic past. They see our modern world as ugly and polluted. They look at science with suspicion and worry that things like genetic engineering will destroy our natural foods. They feel like this so-called progress is actually leading us towards a dystopia, a terrible world. But what about you? Are you more attracted to the Enlightenment ideas of reason and rationality, of science and skepticism? Or are you more attracted to the romantic ideas of passion and beauty, of artistry and aesthetic value, of intuition and meaning? Most of us are some mix between the two. But remember, as we learned in the first lesson, ideas have consequences. This concludes Lesson 9 of Big Ideas Throughout History.